Hi, my name is Megan Finnerty, and I'm with the USA Today, and it is my joy to be hosting this show tonight. I am so excited to be coming to you from my very glamorous living room to bring you Storytellers Live in your house. We deeply appreciate you taking a chance on live storytelling this evening and joining us for stories about fresh starts with 5 Americans from across the country. You guys know that since 2016, the Storytellers Project has brought thousands and thousands of people to stages across America, but we have canceled our shows in real life right now because it just doesn't seem prudent. But while it seems unsafe to get together in theaters, we know it feels necessary to get together on the internet and possibly like outside at a distance. So we've handpicked some of our very best stories from the last 3 years that are going to be told tonight live from people's houses. And so I want to introduce you to our storytellers right now. I'd like you to say hi to Marcus Simmons from Lafayette, Louisiana. Hi, Marcus. Lee Rood is coming to us from Des Moines, Iowa. Shannon Cason from Detroit, Michigan. Hi, Shannon. Anjeanette Damon from Reno, Nevada. And Carly Davis from Phoenix. Thanks for being here. Awesome, you guys. So if you've watched our shows before, you know, here's what this is not. This is not a TED Talk. This is not Toastmasters. It's not a how-to. It's not an inspirational speech like Tony Robbins isn't going to pop out behind me. It's not an educational lecture or a slideshow. We're not going to sell you anything unless maybe like a very small subscription, possibly. Instead, we're here to visit with you. We know storytelling is about community connecting, right? It's about opening your heart, receiving the story of others, being curious about your neighbors. That's how we know our hearts change, our communities get larger. We invite you to do that here tonight. What the stories are going to be kind of mixed, right? We have our diversity of tellers, and they're going to tell with a diversity of styles. Some will be polished and professional. Some are going to be casual and conversational. All of them are going to be told in a way that is most organic and natural for that storyteller. That's what we encourage. We believe at USA Today, and certainly here at the Storytellers Project, that empathy and understanding is vital always, but especially in times of uncertainty. And it is my heart's joy to present these stories to you tonight. I also want to point out I'm based in Phoenix, and I'm very excited to be wearing my very special necklace. So we're dressed up for you guys tonight. I'm also in a cool t-shirt that says vote because we're less than 100 days out from the election, and I hope you're registered. It's really important to participate in our democracy. Your vote is like a tiny story. So with that, you guys, we're going to get in and we're going to open the show with Shannon Cason. Take it away.
My dad wore big hats and double-breasted suits. And he talked big when we drove around Detroit in his Cadillac. He said it was triple black. I was just a kid at the time. I said, Daddy, what's triple black? He said, my Cadillac, boy. I'm like, nah, Dad, what does triple black mean? He was quiet. I don't think he knew, but my dad always had a big answer. He said, black on the outside, black on the inside, and a black man driving, triple black. Then something happened. And my dad blamed it on this guy named Reagan and this thing called Reaganomics. Then he didn't wear the big hat as much anymore, or the double-breasted suits. Somebody came and took the Cadillac, and the Toyota we drove around Detroit would leak from the sunroof on rainy days, but my dad was still larger than life. I was with him when he found another Cadillac. We drove into this parking lot, and it was a black Cadillac, I remember, but it had rust all over it. It had stucco, it had gold and chrome plating on it. And I remember my first thought was, this car looks tacky. But we got out of the car and looked at it, and my dad was so excitement is contagious. And he was telling me all the things he was going to do to the car. And he said it was a limousine. And by the end of it all, I said, this limo is fresh. Never should have said that. 8th grade graduation. It wasn't the highlight of my scholastic career, but being that I went to a high school with a 50% dropout rate. It was a big deal to about 50% of the students. Kids were talking about getting tuxedos, boyfriend and girlfriend. We're talking about wearing the same colors. Some people were saying they were going to get limos. I came home from playing basketball one day, and I walked in the house, and my sister said, Daddy said to beep him. So I went into the kitchen phone, and I beeped him. You remember beepers? You remember kitchen phones? My dad called back, and he said, yeah, I know how much you love the limo. I know you got 8th grade graduation coming up. Your dad will take you to the graduation in the limo, let you show off to all your friends. Then he hung up the phone. I was mortified. I did not want to drive in that limo. I did not want to drive in this Bishop Don Juan Superfly Batmobile. See, it's like this. I'm an understated Boy Scout. Yeah, I played basketball, but I'm an honor student, and I'm a virgin. I didn't imagine. I could imagine like getting out of that limo and all my friends and classmates laughing at me because it just didn't fit who I was. But this is Detroit. Cars are important. Your car is a part of your personality. I couldn't tell my dad that I can't drive in his limo. So I just got to take this one for the team. Graduation day. My mom is running around with the camera taking Polaroids. I'm like, Ma, save it for college or at least high school. This is 8th grade graduation. Then my sister comes in and she says, Dad's on the phone. So I go into the kitchen phone. I'm like, my dad is telling me, I know I said I'll take you to the graduation in the limo, but your dad got to run across town and for some business. I got to make this money. I'm not going to be able to take you to the graduation. Just drive there with your mom. And then he hung up the phone. Whew. So I drive. I drive to the graduation with my mom and my sister in her Ford Granada, which is the plainest car that's ever been made. I mean, just the exact opposite of my dad's limo. And we get to the graduation, and I see all my classmates and my friends. And some of my classmates have tuxedos. I remember some of them had a white tuxedo. One guy even had a top hat. And boyfriend and girlfriends were dressed alike, and people were getting out of limos. And I remember looking at myself in the window to the gymnasium in the reflection and just seeing myself. And I'm like, I just always look so regular, just regular old Shannon. So my dad always keeps his word, and he showed up to the graduation in time to see me cross over 8th grade graduation. And at the end of the graduation, we were going to go to, I don't know where you go in your city or your town, but in Detroit, at the end of graduation, we go to Red Lobsters. You know, you go to Red Lobsters with an S. So I walked down to my dad at the graduation, and I say, Dad, I'm going to ride with you. And we left the gymnasium, and we went out to his long black, silver and gold, everything on it, limousine. And my dad held the door for me, and all my classmates and friends watched as I got in. And I kind of felt like someone important. Over the years, I've gotten more and more comfortable in my own unique style. I'm still regular, I'm still super regular, but I understand that sometimes it's okay to show off. And my dad still drives a Cadillac. Thank you.
Shannon, thank you so much for your story. Thank you so much. Also,
Thank you for having me.
you don't seem like super regular, but I appreciate the thought. I do also want
I've
to
come a long way. I've come a long way.
I hear you. I do want to call out like that moment. I just think there's like no more universal moment than when like you're a kid and you have an idea of what is a cool car and that your parents don't have it. I
Hmm.
mean, and then all of us just end up driving. We're lucky to drive that car that they had that then they give us when we're older, right? Like I
You're
definitely drove
right.
my parents' Dodge Grand Caravan.
You're right. My first car that I drove of my dad's, he had a brown Eldorado. I had no problems with the Eldorado. And if you would have gave me the Cadillac, I would have had no problems with the
That's it.
limousine either. When you reach a certain age, you just want to drive. But
You just
that was
want to
eighth
drive.
grade,
That's
so I
what I'm
wasn't driving
saying.
then.
Heck yeah, heck yeah.
Yeah.
Shane, thank you so much for your story and thank you for introducing us to your dad.
Thank you. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. Now is in the time of our show when we want to thank our national sponsor. We are genuinely and deeply thankful to Humana because they sponsor our shows in the normal outside times in real life. But they've stuck with us virtually because they believe that sharing stories makes for healthier people and healthier communities. And they know that we need these connections to each other and to our health now more than ever. As the coronavirus situation continues to change, Humana is committed to the health, the safety, and well being of the people and the communities it serves. And they really do mean this. Like they mailed out masks to a bunch of their members. Like Humana is in it to win it. If you want to learn more about their tips for staying socially connected, even as we're distant, or how to keep your family safe and healthy, you can visit humana.com. We appreciate their resources and support they invest in USA Today Network that enable us to make these shows possible. So thank you, Humana, for joining us. Now, I'd like to introduce Carly Davis. She gets a special sticker, a special, like extra special welcome and thank you because Carly is one of our national coaches. She helps support our storytellers when we put on shows by coaching them and helping our colleagues across America coach. So I'm not saying that to like you put a bunch of pressure on Carly, but I
Yeah,
do want
no
to thank
big.
her. Yeah, sorry. But I do want to thank her publicly because she's part of the Storytellers Project extended family. Thanks so much, Carly. Take it away.
Thank you, Megan. So I became a mom for the first time in 2011, and it was a shock. Having a baby, becoming a mom is a shock. Staying home with that baby is a shock. Sort of like what maybe we're all feeling all over again right now as we try to stay home with our families. That first day dad goes back to work, you're like, call me. It was so brand new, and it was lonely and some anxiety, and I just felt so adrift in this brand new world, taking care of this tiny human. And I was looking for support. I was looking for community, for ideas, for resources, and I found that on the internet. Probably like a lot of moms my age, I gravitated specifically to mom blogs. And I sort of hate to use that word, but that's the fastest way to tell you what I was doing. I was reading a lot of mom blogs. I got especially taken in with this one theme, this one trope that a lot of them would use, this sort of epiphany idea. And they had these aspirational titles like The Day I Stopped Yelling, or The Day I Stopped Wearing Yoga Pants and Actually Started Doing Yoga. And those totally took me in. And I think part of the reason is because on the days I fell apart, or the days I hardly changed clothes or showered, that maybe I was still okay as long as I could point to it in retrospect and say, I never did that again. So I'll tell you about the day I stopped yelling. I was in a public bathroom. Theologians will tell you the faith will find you anywhere. I was anywhere. I was somewhere. I was somewhere between our home in Phoenix, Arizona, and our destination of New Orleans, Louisiana. 4 days on the I-10 with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And my 3-year-old was in the middle of potty training. So I was making sure we were stopping like every 2 hours so he could try to go potty. Just try. You know, that's the magic word. Just try. So here I am in this bathroom, just me and my little boy. I'm crouching on this cold tile and I'm cajoling, I'm begging, and then I'm threatening, and then I'm yelling. I'm yelling, will you just try and go potty so we can get out of here? And then I realized it doesn't work. It doesn't work that way, and the plumbing doesn't work that way. Nobody in the history of mankind, especially mankind, has ever peed because somebody was standing over them yelling, will you just go already? So I quit. I quit yelling. And I was crying and he was crying. And somehow there was a skylight and we're hugging. And I'm thinking, yes, that's my epiphany. I'm never going to yell again. We're going to go forward together. And then he wipes his face across my shirt. You know, I'm on his level. He's 3 years old. And I do this, right? I break the hug. And he's little, but he's so in tune with me and he's so smart. And he can tell he's losing control of the situation. I'm turning back into Mad Mommy from a couple minutes ago. And then he says, but Mommy, they're just tears. And then I just wanted to drown myself in the toilet. That was the worst. Those were tears I caused. So instead of making a weird promise that I won't yell anymore, I did promise to try to be kinder and gentler. And remember, he's just a tiny human trying to make it. I've made a lot of weird promises and I've kept on looking for my epiphany. As I said, there was his little brother is right behind him. And then 2 years ago, we added another one. Especially in this moment now where we're all home together, we keep on making new promises. And I keep on looking for my epiphany. But I do think my real epiphany, I did find it. And it started as a joke. And that's part of why I think it was true, because it started as a joke. One evening, it's the end of the day, you sort of collapse into bed and I run through all of my failures, all of my shortcomings, and you know, you just beat yourself up. And I turned to my husband and I said, we get to try again tomorrow. It started as a joke, but I think that is real. We do get to try again tomorrow. That's the gift. And that's the magic word. Just try. Thank you so much.
Carly, thank you so much for your story.
Thank you.
I love that you have such a beautiful ending about trying and like doing better, but in the middle of your story, you're like, I thought about drowning myself in a toilet in a public restroom. Like
things you never
like
thought
really
you would do. Yeah.
It just really covers the bases for what it's like to be a human. I think soup to nuts, whether you're a mom or not, you're like, there's some days. But honestly, Carly, thank you so much for keeping it so real. And you guys will be happy to know Carly has 3 beautiful boys. She's a boy mom times 3, and they all seem to be potty trained.
So far, so good.
Yeah, right? Awesome. Carly, thank you so much for your story. Awesome. We are excited to bring up our next storyteller, Anjeanette Damon. Anjeanette is coming to us from the Reno newsroom, where she was a part of The City podcast season number 2. If you want to follow up what The City was all about, please pay attention to Anjeanette's story. And we've also posted links to what her work and how to follow The City as a podcast in the chat, like in the comment section. So you can check out more of Anjeanette's work there. With that, Anjeanette, take it away.
Hi. I'm Anjeanette Damon, and as Megan said, I am an investigative reporter for the Reno Gazette-Journal. It's a mid-sized daily news organization in a scrappy little town you may have heard of, Reno, Nevada. A lot of people probably haven't heard of Reno, but a lot of you who have heard of Reno, you might know this city by the reputation that's been built by outsiders. You might know Reno as that crappy little town that Reno 911 makes fun of, or the city that late night comedians love to bag on. But those of you who've been here, you know that Reno is just a kickin' town. We've got fun restaurants and bars. There's a river that goes right through downtown. We've got mountains and desert to play in. For me, this is the city that I grew up in. This is where I've built my career. This is where I've raised my family. In short, Reno is home. And in late 2017, I got the chance to tell one of the biggest stories of my career. And it happened to be the story of my town. You see, the USA Today network had started a new investigative podcast that examined how power works in American cities. And the executive producer and creator of that podcast, Robin Amer, was looking for a good story to tell for season 2. So she put out a call for pitches to all of the newspapers in USA Today Network's system, said, what should we tell for season 2? And it happened that my story won that pitch contest. You see, at the time, Reno was on the cusp of change. The city leaders and business boosters were trying to kind of usher out this reputation of Reno as a tired old casino town, that town that the comedians make fun of. And they were trying to start this new beginning, this new city that would be a kind of a mecca for the technology industry. They'd had some success already. They brought Apple to the area with huge tax breaks. Microsoft had been in the city for years. Google was on its way. And that crown jewel of the tech industry, the Tesla Gigafactory, a ginormous battery factory, chose Northern Nevada to open its doors. So while this was a new beginning for my city, it was also a new beginning for me. You see, I am an old veteran, ink in my veins newspaper reporter. I know how to grab my notebook, run out to the scene, get the story, come back, write it up, get it published. And along the way, the news business has changed a whole bunch. So I've had to adapt. I've had to reinvent myself. I've had to learn new things. I've done a TV show. I've learned how to shoot video. I've learned how to use social media to build an audience and to connect with that audience. But one thing I had never done before was audio. I'd never done any radio. I'd never produced any audio. So I had a lot to learn. First of all, I had to learn how to use this giant microphone. And that went pretty easily. I learned how, what all the buttons and knobs on the recorder did. I learned how to set proper levels, how to hold the microphone correctly so I got the good audio. And I thought, this is going to be hard to get people to talk into this thing. They're going to be scared of it. It's huge. It kind of looks like a big battery baton or something. But no, quite the opposite. People came running. People wanted to tell their stories. People wanted to talk into the microphone. And they said some amazing things I never would have thought that they would say. You're going to have to listen to the podcast to hear some of that. I don't want to ruin it for you. So be sure to check that out if you're interested. I had to learn a new way of reporting. I had to learn how to slow down, to spend a lot of time with people, to kind of experience life as they were experiencing it, rather than just getting a quote and writing it down in a notebook. I had to learn a new way of writing. Writing for radio is much different than writing for the newspaper. One big difference is with the newspaper, it's me and pretty much one editor reading my stuff, telling me how to make it better. I make it better. It goes in the paper. Great. With podcasting, I had this whole team of just very talented people, a story consultant and editors and producers. And we all sat in a group and we read the scripts together, and I had to grow a very thick skin because I was getting feedback from every which way. People didn't always agree on what would be great. I had to learn how to kind of synthesize all that and let this tremendously talented group of people help me make this the best script that it possibly could be. I also had to learn how to talk like a podcaster. I thought this was going to be easy. I thought, you could just drink a bunch of whiskey and get that kind of sexy, rattly, raspy voice. No, that's the opposite of what you're supposed to do. No whiskey, no milk. You're supposed to drink tea and honey and lemon. You're supposed to be very quiet, not talk a lot. Definitely no screaming or yelling, which is hard for me because I have a teenage son who gets yelled at, but he also plays basketball, and I love to be that crazy mom in the stands screaming a lot. I also had to learn how to not be boring. I remember one of the first reporting trips where the Chicago team, Robin and her team, came out to see Reno, to experience Reno and what the town was like. I was taking them on a tour, and we went by one of the legal brothels that's just outside of town. And Robin's like, okay, so describe what happens in these brothels. And so I got very kind of uncomfortable and stilted and started using technical words. And I'm like, you know, the woman meets with her customer and they try and settle on what services are going to be provided. And Robin just stopped and she kind of rolled her eyes and she's like, Anjeanette, oh my gosh, if you can make brothels sound boring, we've got a lot of work to do. And it was true. We did have a lot of work to do, and we did it. And I think that's one of the things that I've learned about fresh starts. You kind of think a new beginning, you just snap your fingers and it's a new beginning and everything's gone away and you can just start new and it's real easy. But it's not all the time, right? It takes a lot of care and a lot of work to do right. And as I was doing this reporting on the story of Reno changing, I started to realize that the city hadn't necessarily done all of that work. It was having some success. The economy was picking up, people were working, it was getting these technology companies to town that it wanted, but it didn't seem to be keeping an eye out to see who was benefiting. Was everybody benefiting? And quite the opposite, were people being harmed in this change? Now, part of this story I forgot to mention earlier was as the city leaders are trying to change Reno, they had zeroed in on this stubborn vestige of old Reno, and those are the strip clubs. These giant, gaudy buildings in these prime locations in downtown Reno. The city council wanted to get these strip clubs out of downtown. They wanted to move them. And they were going to use whatever means possible to do that. So that's part of what we were kind of investigating and looking at as part of this story. And as I was doing the reporting and seeing that Reno wasn't necessarily taking all the care that it should to make sure people weren't being harmed, I met some people. And I met a stripper who worked in one of these clubs. And she had got caught up in an undercover police sting that the city initiated to gather dirt to try make it easier for them to move the clubs out. And for this young woman, the single mom, this citation threatened to end her very ability to make a living. I met a young man who worked in the new Reno in the Tesla Gigafactory, tremendously bright kid with a huge future in front of him. He was so excited to get this job at the hot new place, the Gigafactory. Within the first week, he had the tip of his finger smashed off. He wasn't the only worker at that factory to lose a digit or to suffer an injury. In some cases, there were some dangerous conditions there, and that company was actively working to keep safety inspectors out. And probably the woman who really kind of meant the most to my heart is Velma. And she is a grandma who stands all of maybe 4'8". She's a powerful woman. She's raising her granddaughter in a weekly motel. In Reno, the weekly motels are kind of the housing of last resort for those who might be homeless otherwise. And they're not always the best places to live. Where Velma lived, it was an aging motel. The elevators broke down all the time. They were so loud you couldn't have a conversation when you're riding up in one. When you got out into the hallway where Velma lives, it's dark. The lights don't work. The ones that do are blinking. There's cockroaches that crawl on the walls. But you go down the hall and you open the door, and Velma has created in this space the size of a motel room, an entire home for herself and her granddaughter. And she's built a community with her neighbors. They help each other out. She helps them. They help her. And this home that she had built, that she was holding on so hard to try and save, was in danger. She was in danger of losing it from the gentrification that this new Reno is starting to sweep in. And when she went to city council to take the microphone in tears, asking the city to stop this effort to get the strip clubs out, a lot of people saw her as maybe a pawn or as a person to be pitied. Nobody really likes to be seen as a caricature of themselves, whether it's Velma, whether it's this old city that's made fun of by comedians. And I realized then that if I hadn't been on this journey of kind of relearning some of the skills that I needed to relearn, I might not have seen that community and that home and that full person that Velma was either. Doing this work, I had to confront a lot of my own weaknesses. And as a result, it made me a better journalist, even now that I'm back to my quote unquote real job. We were successful. We got out a great podcast, this team of talented people that I worked with. It garnered national acclaim. More importantly, it started a conversation in this city that is still ongoing. It convinced people they needed to pay closer attention to what their elected leaders were doing, and they really engage in that process. And I can only hope as we go forward that my city, my hometown, it confronts its own weaknesses and it puts in that work so that as it changes, it really becomes the best city that it can be. Thank you very much.
Anjeanette, thank you so much for your journalism and your work. I don't want to be weird, you guys, but I am a stan of the City Podcast, and I am really, really grateful for you talking about how hard it is to be not like the best at something at kind of mid-career. Right? I think that's a really powerful idea, and I appreciate the vulnerability and thoughtfulness you've offered us tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah. That was not a backhanded compliment, America. Awesome. Thanks, Anjeanette. But I really want to say that, right? Like so many of us, the older you get, right, your value is bound up in your competency and like your skill set. And the like profoundly beautiful thing is that like the City is a really great podcast, and Anjeanette's willingness to like tackle something new and humble herself in front of like new skills, new abilities, and yet all to have like a fresh perspective on a topic she'd been covering in a city she'd lived in her whole life. It makes for just really incredible journalism that deeply served her community. And that came, as you heard in her story, from like real thoughtfulness and self-awareness. And I know that takes courage. And I just think like, gosh, I hope I always have the courage that Anjeanette has shown to like continue challenging myself professionally and, being willing to keep learning every day, even when it's hard. So thanks for that story. I want to take a moment to thank our storytellers and our coaches. Right now, we would like to acknowledge our colleagues at the Des Moines Register, at the Arizona Republic, at the Lafayette Advertiser. And Shannon came to us through our colleague Michael Heller right here at Storytellers. And we want to mention these people because our colleagues across America like actually coach our storytellers, like they help produce these shows. And so it really matters that they like invest in their time, and we really, really appreciate them. And obviously Anjeanette, like she came to us from Reno and collaborated with her colleagues to bring you her story today. And it is real work. They volunteer to be coached for several hours to bring you these stories. And so we just want to acknowledge all of our colleagues across the country and say thank you for making the Storytellers Project so powerful in your communities. I'd like to introduce our next storyteller right now. Marcus, as I mentioned earlier in the show, is coming to us from Lafayette, Louisiana, where several years ago he shared this fresh start story on stage, and we are lucky to have him here again this evening.
Hello.
Hi.
Okay, so I'm from Lafayette, Louisiana, and I was born fourth child, oldest boy of a beautiful, beautiful Black woman. Her name was Cheno. I never had a father. Well, actually, I had a stepdad who ended up going to prison for attempting to burn down the house with us in it. Now, growing up as a boy, it's important to have a father because, that's where you learn to be strong. That's where you learn that you're smart. That's where you learn that you can accomplish anything. I didn't have that. So while he was in prison in another relationship, my mom was gunned down, left paralyzed. And I remember in her seemingly last moments, she made me promise that I would take care of my brothers and sisters, which I agreed and I intended to hold on to. Well, it wasn't long before we found ourselves with nothing. I remember pushing my mom and my brothers and sisters, my mom in a wheelchair, brothers and sisters in tow, to a homeless shelter. In the pouring down rain, it's freezing cold. And we get to the homeless shelter and I was denied entry for whatever reason. So here I was, I found myself homeless, a young boy, scared, confused, mad, cold, hungry, just walking with nowhere else to go, until I decided to make the local park bathroom my home. So I slept in the bathroom when it was cold. I slept on the park benches. And one of those nights, I remembered the promise I made to my mom. And I decided that I had to man up and I had to fix this. So I made a decision, worst decision I ever made in my life. Started selling drugs. Yeah, I helped to fix our situation, but then I made another situation because I found myself defending myself in an armed robbery where I shot two guys and one of them died. So I was arrested for the charges of first-degree murder and attempted first-degree murder. And after a mistrial or two, I was finally convicted of the charge of manslaughter and attempted manslaughter, sentenced to 31 and a half years in Angola State Penitentiary. And back then, it had the label of the bloodiest prison in the nation. And prison was hard, man. Prison was horrible. You know, I mean, it lived up to the name. And I remember years passed by with no communication from anyone. No money for commissary, no food, no soap, no deodorant. I remember filling up on water at night because I was so hungry and forcing myself to go to sleep before hunger struck again. And you know you don't really sleep in prison. I remember being, you know, not having any soap, any deodorant. So I remember when the guards wasn't looking, I was using the powdered bleach and other chemicals that they use to clean the bathroom toilet and the shower to wash my body. Just some hard times, man. But I want you to remember that I made promises to myself as well. And one of those promises to myself was that I would get even with the man that shot my mom. So needless to say, due to disciplinary action, I found myself in solitary confinement. You know, one of the worst times of my life, that silence, just trying to maintain your sanity. You know, 24 hours seems like 24 years. You know, I want you to imagine this. Imagine the only music that you hear, and this is coming from a guy who loved reggae music, you know, the only music that you can hear is the rhythm of your heartbeat, the rhythm of your breath, your breathing pattern. You know, the only conversations you have is with your regrets and your guilt. You know, imagine that, horrible. You know, my prayers to God at the time was, man, if you loved me, you wouldn't let me wake up in the morning. But yet I kept waking up. So here I was, mad with God. You know, then I received a letter in the mail one time from my mom, just out of the blue. And she was reminding me of my promise. And I guess she might have heard of my disciplinary behavior. And she wrote this letter reminding me of my promise and told me, Pop, you know, we need you. You was our leader. We won't survive unless you come home. So at that point, my prayers changed. And I started asking God, Yahweh, that if you gave me a second chance, I would dedicate my life to fixing my community, to keeping young people from coming into this place. I realized that if I was going to get out of there, I first had to live long enough. So I began working out. I began taking care of myself physically. That became a passion. That passion became a way of life. Then I started educating myself, reading every single thing that I could get my hands on. Then I started working on my spiritual self. Then one day, those doors opened. And after 11 years on parole, of a strenuous, horrible parole, I find myself a free man. Today, as a free man, I'm a welding instructor for the local college, where I teach kids, troubled kids, that they're smart. I teach them that they could be anything if they put their mind to it. I'm also an entrepreneur, where I have a fitness app out in the app stores, and the motto of the company is self-preservation equals longevity. I'm also a newly published author of a book called Life Lies, where I guess I offer the blueprint to how I survived such a strenuous challenge and succeeded it. I'm also a community leader, where I sit on a community relations board with the Lafayette Police Department. And sometimes I often advise them on how to approach certain situations in the inner city or ghetto communities. I'm also a vote staff member, where what I do is I fight for the rights of people who are incarcerated. I guess my message to the people today is that don't be afraid to face your challenges, because those tears can turn into a lesson, and that lesson can turn into a strength, and that strength can be your story, and your story could be your success. Thank you, guys.
Oh my gosh, Marcus, thank you so much for your story.
Welcome. Thank you for having me.
That is incredible. We are so blessed to have you tell your story on stage in Lafayette and join us again here on the show. I so appreciate your thoughtfulness, your resiliency, and you did really stick the landing with your story can be your purpose. I mean, you had a real bow there at the end. Amen. If you guys are inspired by Marcus or you want to work with him, obviously he is a man dedicated to his community. We've put some links in the chat and a link to his book. And really, you know, like, give him a call. Marcus is here, obviously, to like serve and connect. Thank you, Marcus, for your story and your time.
Thank you.
Awesome. We're closing our show tonight with our colleague from Des Moines. Lee Rood is a columnist there, and you'll learn more about what she covers. And we are just really thankful to have her here this evening because she has a different kind of fresh start story. Lee, bring us home.
So I'm a little bit headstrong. My parents might try to tell you that I came out of the womb that way, but I blame my job. Investigative reporters are taught and they're encouraged to keep pushing until you get to the truth. You do that for years and it starts to slip into your personal life. My friends can tell you any number of stories about how my inability to retreat can get kind of weird sometimes. Suffice to say, I'm no peach to date, at least not until after the background check. Anyway, this particular story begins on a cold January night in 2012. I'm out with two of my best friends when I ask one of them if she wouldn't mind taking me to the Greenwood Lounge so I can catch one of my favorite bands. Now, the Greenwood on a Friday night is kind of like that movie Groundhog's Day. It's always dark, always a lot of the same people. The bathrooms are always a little third world-esque, but it's fun and there's live music and always friendly faces behind the bar. The Greenwood is actually where I spent my first Friday night in Des Moines more than 20 years ago when I started at the Des Moines Register. And it's probably going to be where I spend my last Friday after I put away my notebook for good. Greenwood also happens to be where I met my husband, Paul. He was a very old school gentleman who worked there 6 days a week for 25 years until we got married in 2010. My friends tease that Paul and I got together because he kept me well served, but we actually had a lot in common. Paul always wanted to be a private investigator. I was an investigator only for the local newspaper. Because of our jobs, bartender, reporter, we both heard a lot of stories and a lot of bullshit. In fact, Paul left the Greenwood in 2010 because he'd heard enough bullshit. He used to tell me that his one recurring nightmare was that it was closing time and nobody would go home. Even after he quit the Wood, though, Paul couldn't shake those late hours. And so we used to stay up really late on weekends and watch old spaghetti westerns and this 50s noir series, Peter Gunn. Peter was a private investigator who worked out of a darkly lit lounge. He had this girlfriend, Edie, a lounge singer with a silky voice. And Edie always seemed to be waiting around for Peter, but his dangerous work always got in the way. I used to tease Paul because I knew he really wanted to be Peter Gunn. And honestly, he really looked the part to a T. But in real life, I was usually the one who was out poking around, getting in tough spots, and he was the one who was left waiting. Anyway, on this particular night, I'm out having a great time in the neighborhood, doing my middle-aged lady dancing, and I decided to call Paul, I guess, at around 11:30 to come pick me up. Begrudgingly, he did. He popped in for a couple of minutes, said hi to a couple regulars, and then we were home about midnight. The next morning, we wake up and my phone is ringing way too early. It's my credit and debit card companies calling to tell me that somebody's been on an all-night shopping spree with my wallet. Something like $900 worth of charges were racked up from midnight until 6 a.m. So we hop in the car and we go down to the cop shop and make a police report. And that's probably where I would have left it, except the next week I get this call from Detective Raymond Carrington at the Des Moines Police Department. And he pretty much tells me that nothing's going to happen with my case. He says he comes to work every week with a new stack of identity theft cases on his desk, and he doesn't have time to request all the surveillance video from this guy who stole my wallet. So we sit down and we make a list of all the transactions, exactly when they happened and where they happened, and we give them to Carrington hoping that this will help him out. And for a minute, we're really excited because he comes back and he says he's got a piece of video from a local Walgreens of a guy swiping one of my cards at exactly the time of one of the transactions. And what's more, he's dyed the top of his head a very unnatural shade of blonde. Paul looks at this image and he says, I remember that guy from the night that I came and picked you up. Only I remembered him because he had all these facial piercings. All those years working behind the bar had taught him to keep an eye on people when he was working. And that guy definitely wasn't a regular. Carrington says, well, that's great, except we still don't know who this guy is or where we can find him. And so me being me, I say, why don't you give me a copy of that photo and I'll go look for him myself. At home, Paul and I are talking about the crime in very Peter and Edie mode. And I tell him, you know, if this guy does it again, he's probably going to go back to the same place at roughly the same time. And so the next Friday, we go back to the Greenwood Lounge after dinner. We have a look around, but we don't see him. And so I say to Paul and our friend Kevin, I want to go to that new place that opened up in the new dance club in the old dinner theater right next door. They both say that's a terrible idea. And so I go. At the door of the dance club, there's a security guard, and I tell him what happened and show him a picture of the wallet thief, and he doesn't care. He waves me in. I walk in, I take a look, and right there next to the bar, about 25 feet away, is the guy with the unnatural blonde hair. I don't want to lose him, so I scurry up behind him and I tap him on the shoulder. He turns around and I don't know what to say, so I say, "You want to dance?" He must have recognized me because he just darted off. So I go and I grab the security guard and I say, "Will you please call the police?" We must have watched way too many crime shows because I remember saying I wanted to make a citizen's arrest. The cops show up, they find out the guy has a warrant, and so they cuff him and take him to the squad car. On the way, as he's leaving, I remember that he and Paul exchanged some very colorful language and thinking that wasn't very Peter Gunn-like, but I was really glad Paul was there. And that probably should have been where I left it, except the next week at work, I couldn't help myself. I dig up this guy's record online and I realize it's as long as your arm. He's got arrests for petty theft, for forgery, for first-degree robbery. And I'm talking to Carrington and he said, well, now you know what a predator looks like. But I also see that he's never really faced anything much in the way of consequences. And so I take it upon myself to call his probation officer just to let him know that the wallet thief is facing a new charge. A few months later, I guess, I'm called in to do a deposition. And somehow in all my years of reporting, I guess I didn't realize that I was going to be sitting across the table from this guy. So I walk in and I'm kind of surprised and I don't know what to say again. So I say, "Hey, I've been dying to meet you." I tell the lawyers at the table that my husband's willing to testify that he saw the wallet thief that night at the Greenwood Lounge, only he remembered him because of the face piercings and thought maybe he was wearing a hat that night. The wallet thief hears this and he says, "I wasn't wearing a hat." Thanks for putting yourself at the scene. In the end, he got like 14 days in jail. I remember thinking maybe that wasn't enough, but the prosecutor in the case told me there really wasn't a choice. The guy had some sort of life-threatening disease, and if he spent more than 14 days in jail, he risked losing his Social Security. I wound up writing a column about identity theft, and I used the wallet thief as an example. And that really needed to be the end of it. Because right after that, Paul was diagnosed with a rare cancer. By the time they found it, he had 3 tumors in the back of his head. I remember thinking then, when we were going from doctor to doctor, from the University of Iowa hospitals to the Mayo Clinic, that I would have done just about anything if we could have had a second chance. But 8 months later, we were both up late again at night, this time at hospice, saying a really long goodbye. We both hated that Edie was going to have to go on without Peter Gunn. 6 months after Paul died, I found myself at a burlesque show. My daughter Liddy had a friend who was performing in a troupe, and neither one of us had ever been to a burlesque show before, so we decided to go. We walk into the place, it's super crowded, we're trying to work up to the stage. We walk by the bar, and there he is, the guy with the unnatural blonde hair. He looks at me, I look at him, we're both sort of stupefied. And then he comes up to me and he says he wants to talk. And he's really insistent, so we decide to go into the men's bathroom. It was the only place that was quiet. Liddy's there and she's trying to be tough because she knows that this guy's a bad apple. And then he begins to speak. He says he wants to thank me for what I did. He says that he's been mentally ill and drug addicted his whole adult life. And he's never managed to stay sober until those 14 days in jail. He says he does have a fatal disease, but right now he's doing good. He's got a job at a barbershop and life is good. He said I had guts to do what I did, and he honestly thought about writing a response to the column that I had written in the Register. And then he hugged me, and he hugged my daughter. And then he and his friend just went off into the night. One thing that you learn in my line of work is that there's always more to the story. And usually that story is much more interesting than the one you started out with. After a story breaks, people also have to go on with their lives. Do I think that the wallet thief really went on the straight and narrow after I ran into him that night? I don't know. But I do know that sometimes people wish more than anything for a second chance. And that night, I thought he deserved his. Thank you.
Lee, thank you for such a beautiful story and such a powerful way to close our evening.
Sure.
Yeah. Man, you guys, it is such a joy to have Lee on our show. She's been a columnist for years and is like really part of the lifeblood of the city of Des Moines and a real leader in their journalism community. So it's an honor to have you on the show this evening. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to have a chance to thank all of our storytellers right now. So if you will join me in being grateful to Carly Davis, Anjeanette Damon, Shannon Cason, Marcus Simmons, and of course, Lee, thank you all so much for sharing your heart and your stories with us tonight. Tiny internet clapping. Thank you so much to our audience. We have a special thing for you tonight. We are posting a survey in the comments. If you enjoyed the show or you think I could have done more with my hair, either way, let us know what you think. It matters to us. In our normal life, we offer all of our audience members a survey to get feedback so that we can continuously improve. And so virtually and online, we'd like to continue that pattern of improvement and serving you more fully. So there's a link going in the comments. It will stay open for like a whole week. So even if you're watching this late, it's not too late to take the survey. I'd like to thank you again so much for sharing your evening with the Storytellers Project and USA Today. We really appreciate you. Have a good night.